Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Leadership versus Management, the differences in how to be good at both. My name is Kim Buzzy. I'm your Key Relationship Manager, and I want to welcome you to week 2 of our leadership series. If you missed our webinar last week, How Soft Skills Affect Leadership, it is available on our YouTube channel, so make sure that you subscribe, as well as follow us on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, to make sure that you are getting the Twitter to get the most recent updates. All of our webinars are recorded. This one is being recorded today, and you will have access to it in about a week on our YouTube. Also, just to let you know, a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. At the top of your screen, there's an icon of a person with their hand raised. If you agree, disagree, you need me to speak a little louder or speak a little softer, you need me to speed up or slow down, this is where you can let me know, as well as laughter and applause is always appreciated. This is going to be interactive. So if you have questions, comments, please go ahead and you can add them in the chat box. We'll talk about them as we go along, as well as having a Q&A at the end. And you will be able to download a presentation, a copy of this presentation as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So as we talk about leadership, I have some staggering statistics that I want to share with you. So statistics such as 60% of new managers fail within the first 24 months. 47% of new supervisors receive no supervisor training. Less than 10% of managers and supervisors that were surveyed were prepared for a leadership role before or after being promoted. And approximately 65% of managers learn leadership by guessing how to lead people. So by a show of hands, raise your hand if you are a current manager of a team of people. So let me go ahead and see if we have anybody on here. So we've got some hands popping up. Wonderful. Now, go ahead and raise your hand if you are preparing to take on that leadership role. Maybe it's something that interests you. You're on this webinar, but you don't have actual leadership skills. Is there anybody on here so I have a few of those as well. Wonderful. Regardless of where you are, we're going to talk about some of these statistics. We're going to talk about how to overcome this. Because at the end of the day, whenever we promote someone as a leader, our objective is never to set anyone up on our team for failure. But most of the time, that's what we do when we promote someone into a management role, into a leadership role. So what we need to look at is, one, what can we do to help people realize what are the responsibilities of a manager? How can they learn them before we begin to hold them to that level of management and leadership? So when you talk about it, it's difficult to balance the responsibilities of a leadership role, whether it's depending whether it's C-level where you're the CEO, or maybe you're that first-time manager and you've got a team of 2 people. You have to balance a lot of different responsibilities. Responsibilities such as motivating, selling. I've got to create a strategic plan. Now I'm responsible for a team of people to reach goals. You want me to lead by example? I've got to deal with conflict. I've got to hire and fire. I've got all these metrics running through my head. And now you're wanting me for succession planning. How in the world am I going to do that? And we're going to talk about some of those questions and the mazes and how they apply to both of them. But before we do, remember I said this was going to be interactive. So I have a couple of questions for you. In the upper left-hand corner, and let me know, can you be a good leader without being a good manager? Yes, no, or I don't know. And in the upper right-hand box, go ahead and select whichever one you think. Can you be a good manager without being a good leader? Once again, yes, no, I don't know. And if you think that there is a difference between a leader and a manager, go ahead and type it in that chat box. As you're typing, I'm going to talk about, here's what we see. Can you be a good leader without being a good manager? And about 67% say yes, you can. But when we look over to the other side, where we flip the coin, so to speak, is can you be a good manager without being a good leader? 94% say no. And as we're hearing the differences, inspire versus instruct, lead versus demand, absolutely. What are some of the other? I see other people typing away. Leaders do the right thing, managers do things right. I love that quote. I recently was talking to someone and they said, there are leaders and there are bosses. And if we replace bosses with the managers, that gives us a really good idea of the differences. And we're going to talk about some of those things and how to manage to be both. But there are some people that are good managers, but they're not good leaders. We're going to talk through why that is and where to go from there. And hopefully, when we're done, you're going to have some great ideas and some next steps of where you want to go. Before we begin, let's really talk about the definition of manager versus leader. So the definition of a leader for our manager for this webinar is a manager is a person responsible for controlling or administering all or part of a company or similar organization. So you can have some team managers where they're looking at, you have an accounting department and they're split up into 2 or 3 people per team because they handle multiple locations. And you may have that manager that's in charge of that, that's handling the processes, making sure that everything is going through. A leader is the person who leads or commands a group, organization, or country. And when I say command, it is not, you will do it my way or it's the highway. That is not the sign of a good leader. But it's someone who feels very comfortable with casting that strategic plan, able to say, let's move forward in this direction. They're not necessarily waiting for someone to talk to them. When we look at what are some of the responsibilities of that manager versus the leader, is a lot of times managers require a title. They often say, do what I say. They instruct people based on objectives, and they focus a lot of times on those hard skills, processes, and goals. Whereas a leader, the title is optional. And if you're thinking, what? How many times, or think about yourself, or think about someone in your organization that is that go-to person. Maybe they have been with your company for 20 years and they're, if you need to know something about Omnia, for example, go to this person. They will guide you. They will work together. Instead of telling people, they sell. Let's do this together. Let's work together. Let's move forward with it. They encourage people versus instructing, and they have vision. So they're always thinking, what's the next steps? What can we do to improve on this? Many times the leaders focus on soft skills and, as I said, next steps and people. And when we talk about people, it's not that they're this warm and fuzzy leader. I'll use Steve Jobs as an example. He is one of those leaders that people either love him or they hate him. They, if you've ever read anything about Steve Jobs or know anything about him, there were many times that people didn't like his leadership style. In fact, he was fired from Apple, the company that he founded. And he was fired because of the way he talked with people and the way he bullied people and the way his leadership. He had to take a step back, grow on that leadership path, and then move forward. So when we talk about people, it's not necessarily, I want to be everybody's friend, but how can I empower and teach my people so that they can grow to step up to be a leader? Now, you may be thinking as you're looking at manager and leader, well, all of these things are critical with working with direct reports. So what's the big deal? Why do I have to choose one or the other? Where do I know where I am? I'm successful with most of these things. So what's the big deal? Yeah, I may focus a little bit more on processes and goals, and I may not always be the best encourager, but we get the job done. Is it really that critical? Absolutely. Because when we think about it, a manager is the first step to becoming a great leader. You have to understand what is needed, how to teach people, how to instruct them. But as you grow personally, you're going to move into this. How can I help the team become better? So how do you do that? Well, one of the things you want to think about, and I want to take a moment right now for you to reflect and ask yourself, what are my strengths? What are my challenges? And what are my goals? Because a leader is constantly growing in their development. Whereas a manager may feel very comfortable with saying, oh, this is who I am, this is what I'm going to do, and so I'm not moving forward. A leader is constantly growing their leadership skills, whether it's through webinars like today, whether it's using resources that will tell them their leadership style and their strengths and challenges, or books, or classes, whatever it is, a leader is truly never satisfied with where they are. And then as you reflect, what are my strengths? What are my challenges? What are my goals as a leader? Do I want to learn a hard skill and then move forward? Now ask yourself, do I engage others? Am I giving my team feedback and am I duplicating myself? We cannot be all things to all people all of the time, nor can we be everywhere at once. So, as a leader, as you're transitioning from that management role into a leadership role, you've got to begin to duplicate yourself. Help others grow in their points of view. And as we look at this, I want you to ask yourself a couple of questions. One, how do you deal with conflict? So in the upper left-hand box, I deal with conflict by either A, avoiding it as much as I can, or B, dealing with it right away. Two, ask yourself, how do you filter things? Do you filter everything through the lens of people, or do you filter it through the lens of facts? And then details. Are details always getting in your way or the key to success? Go ahead and answer. So we have some 100% here. So 100%, I deal with it right away. Wonderful. If that's your natural behavioral trait, you don't want to let it grow. But what you may be doing and sending messages to your direct reports or other people is, it's my way or the highway. Or, oh no, here come Kim. Hi. She's always like, I feel like there's a problem here when there's not. If you filter everything through the lens of people or facts, you're going to miss some critical information. And we have about 68% of our attendees today that say they filter everything through the lens of facts. Very objective. But if we focus so much on the facts, what we may see is that we're forgetting the impact on our greatest source of expenses in any company, and that's our payroll. We've got to be able to say, okay, how is this going to affect the people? How can we work with them? And it's not necessarily that we're going to cater to everyone that's on our team, but we have to understand how we naturally filter things. So now that we can look at this as an area of opportunity. And I like this. Details are the key to success. 95% say that. I am in the minority if I were answering because I love some details, but other things I'm just like, I don't want to be bogged down by it. I need to move on. It's getting in my way. Why do I have to worry about that? This is why I have people on my team that deal with this. Knowing that about yourself and how you're natural wired, what those behavioral undercurrents are, is critical. Because before you can be a great manager and transition into a great leader, you have to be self-aware. You have to understand what your strengths and challenges are. Then, as you manage other people, you've got to be aware of others. How do they filter things? How do they communicate? Are they relational? Do they hate dealing with conflict? And then, as you learn that, you've got to adapt and apply. Now, keep in mind that I am not saying that you have to change who you are and be fake, so to speak, with those people that you work with or that you are managing. What I am saying is that the sign of a good manager is meeting somewhere in their greatest needs, in their greatest areas of opportunity, and helping them grow. If we're not helping them grow, what may happen is that we're going to have constant turnover. And we can't depend on the, well, I've got the title, you have to do what I have to say. Self-awareness of understanding your strengths and your challenges, and I'll let you in on a little secret. We all have them, all of us, regardless of what we're doing. But being aware of that is all about our personal development. It shouldn't be a point of pride of, hey, look at me, this is what I'm doing. You've got to change to meet me here. It is truly, here's what I'm understanding. Because as you begin to model, so we go back to leading by example, a great leader leads by example. Your team is going to see how you respond to difficulties. Are you growing from them? How are you internalizing them? Are you allowing this obstacle to stop you dead in the tracks? Are you looking for saying, okay, this is awful, but I've learned from it, we're moving on? I've learned how to use my communication style and know that some people need an attaboy and attagirl and recognition for the effort, while other people may need some more of that time where it's just give me the facts. And this really leads to the first challenge that we're going to talk about. And this is really what we see with new managers, especially managers as a whole, but especially new managers focus on that. And the challenge is positional leadership. What I mean by that is I'm a leader because of my title. You have to deal with it. For the manager side, they're too focused on themselves. Now, that could come into play for a couple of different reasons. One, I'm brand new. I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm managing someone who has 10, 15 years more tenure than I do. So I've got to focus on, this is my title, you're going to respect me. But sometimes we let that tip over into pride. I was promoted, so I must be the best. That's not always the case. You may have been second choice. You may have been the best choice for leadership because of different factors that are playing into it. But we can't come into management with the attitude of I'm the best, I'm above you. We have to look at it to know that people follow people and not titles. So John Maxwell says in his book, The 5 Letters of Leadership, he talks about the different leaders, and positional leadership is the first one. Once again, it's that first step. And a lot of times, as we're establishing ourselves as managers, we may find that we have to rely a little bit more on the title. However, too many people stop at this level and they focus on the title. They focus on what can you do for me because I'm your manager. When we focus on that, that stops us from being able to grow into leadership. So positional leadership is a challenge because it's comfortable, it's easy, but it keeps us in that role as manager versus leader. So tips to overcome it, once again, is people follow people, not titles. You've got to connect and engage with your team. Be unafraid to say, you know what, I'm not quite sure how we do that. Let's talk about it. Show me why we should do it this way. Know your team's strengths, and that all comes from talking with them, from observation. And then last but not least, check your ego. It cannot be about you. As a leader, it moves to now I'm focused on how I can develop my team, not what my team can do for you. And I love this quote. So, if by Gandhi, if you have no character to lose, people will have no faith in you. What that means is that as managers, a lot of times we have a me versus we mentality. So, just newly promoted, especially if you're that top performer, I've had my personal goals. I know where I need to do, and so this is what I'm going to move forward with. When you transition into a leadership supervisory role, you now have to translate, instead of this is my goal and I'm going to do everything I can to hit it, to this is the team's goal and I'm going to do everything I can help them. And you build that mainly on trust and credibility. A manager tells the direct report what to do. A leader tells the direct report what to do from a position of trust. And a lot of times it's so much easier to listen to the good, the bad, and the ugly when you know where it's coming from. And a leader is going to build that trust and credibility. They build it, and then your employees will begin to follow you. How you build it is say what you mean and mean what you say. Don't overpromise and underdeliver. Try to avoid the aspects of favoritism. You've got to think of your employees' trust in you like a bank account. So if you have a checking account, you have money that comes in through your payroll, you have money that comes out through bills and other expenses. At the end of the month, your goal is to have more money in your account than you have spent. If you have spent more than you have brought in, then you go into a negative balance, which is not good. When working with your direct reports, when you're trying to advance from management and being that person who's, these are the processes and this is what you have to do because I say this is how you do it, and move into leadership, you've got to begin to add deposits to that trust bank. So talking with your team, understanding what they're looking for, helping them grow. Like I said, don't overpromise and underdeliver. You are going to make mistakes as a manager and as a leader. And when you make a mistake, it's going to deduct from your trust account with that employee. How you recover from it is either going to deduct more out of the trust bank or begin to deposit a little bit more. So if you want your team to take ownership of any mistakes that they make, you first have to take ownership of mistakes that you make. As that manager, you also have to look at a couple of different things. So when we look at communication, a manager typically gives direction that's focused on the task. A lot of times they don't want to give up certain tasks, either because it's comfortable and this is what I understand, or I don't want to give it up because I don't think you can do it. Well, that's not building trust with your team. They tell people what to do. The leader shares the why behind the what. You're unafraid to share your knowledge of the task. I always like to say, I want to train you up so that when I'm ready to move up, I have some great candidates. The greatest compliment to me as a leader, and I've got 20 plus years of leadership experience in retail and banking and different industries, is when one of my employees, my direct reports, were promoted. That means I've done my job. I've shared my knowledge. I've prepared them for the tasks that they need to take on. Also, focus on the tasks that only you can do. A leader understands that their time is needed to be spent on improving and working with their employees. They don't want to get bogged down in tasks that other people can do. And a leader shares expectation and focuses on the employee's strengths. They're going to not, that doesn't mean, oh, ignore their areas of opportunity. You've got to coach to that as well. But you can't coach on just the negative. You need to improve this. You need to improve that. You're not doing this well. You're not doing that right. Because at that point, you're discouraging your employees. So you've got to tell them, this is what I expect of you. I'm going to help you get there, and let's focus on the strengths that you have with these. So I want you to ask yourself some questions. The first question is, how do I communicate the vision? How well do I listen? And how do I give feedback? And this is critical skills for both the manager and the manager that's wanting to transition into becoming more of that leader, more of that person who is empowering and teaching their employees, their direct reports, to move forward. We've all had bad managers and we've all had bad leaders. And guess what? In a management and leadership role, you are constantly teaching people how to manage, either by, oh, I'm never going to do that, or, oh gosh, this is what I want to do. So to be able to communicate that vision and understand how you listen and how you give feedback, you need to know your communication style. Are you that relational communicator? Do you give specific advice? Are you filtering everything through people? Are you more that analytical communicator where your leadership style is, oh, if they're doing their, if they're doing their job right, they don't need to hear from me. Well, regardless of that, you have to be able to change your leadership style a little bit to be able to communicate with everyone on your team. I love this quote because regardless of style, you've got to use this. The art of persuasion is to convince someone to do something willingly. It's even better if they don't realize they're being persuaded. As a manager and as a leader, how you communicate affects your influence on your team. So if you are that relational communicator where everything is rah, rah, great job, we're doing wonderful, here's how you could be demotivating people on your team. They want the facts. So give them specific feedback. Use your facts to support those decisions and understand not everyone will like the outcome, but it's not against you personally. If you're that more analytical communicator, you want to give frequent one-to-one conversation. You want to recognize effort as well as results. So if you're that analytical communicator, your natural behavioral trait is to focus on the problem. So someone may give you a report and your only comment is there's a typo on page 3, word 4, paragraph 2. It's going to be disheartening. And as you're making decisions, you've got to consider feelings and facts. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to say, oh, someone's going to be sad, I can't do this. No, but you want to make sure that you're really examining how this affects your team. We've decided to cut our hours in the summertime. On Fridays, we'll be closed, which means you only get paid for a 32-hour work week. Well, you may be filtering it through. We've got shorter hours. I've looked at production. On Friday, it's almost nil. But you've got to consider the people with that. If I say you're only getting paid 32 hours, how is that going to affect people who depend on their dollar amount each paycheck? Could I lose some really great people because I've made this sweeping change without talking it through? And communication is key. As a leader and as a manager, you've got to engage, connect, and influence your people. And before you can do any of that, you have to know how you communicate and who you're communicating to. One of the best questions that you can ask is, how can I manage you better? Helping them understand. So I want you to take a moment to think, what is your biggest struggle as a leader? What's keeping you from connecting to your team? And what's said on this webinar kind of it stays on this webinar. So, you don't have to talk specifics, no names, please. But what are some of your biggest struggles? I hate conflict. I don't want to talk with people about their differences. Go ahead and type them in. And then in the lower left-hand box, we're going to talk about your greatest success with engaging employees. So if you feel more comfortable answering that one, you can. So I see we've got drama as a struggle. Absolutely. And it's how do we deal with that drama? What's causing it? What's the root cause? That negativity from employees, drama and gossip, age life experience. And I love that. I was actually talking with some clients today where there was some, well, we think the millennials do this and the, baby boomers are this, and I don't think that we can work together, and how does that happen? And here's what I would say is that it's not a generational gap. It is a gap in the career cycles. You have baby boomers who are more settled in a stable life cycle. But I think about myself. I'm a Gen Xer, and being a Gen Xer, when I came on first in my career, I didn't have a clue what I was doing either, and I had to be mentored and taught. And a lot of that applies to the millennials too. So I'm seeing some great things on here. So I'm going to just kind of keep answering if you have it. Dealing with employee negativity and drama. So negativity and drama is coming up. Trying to be friends and family with everyone. And that is a tough one because there are going to be times as a leader we have to make those hard decisions. I read a quote recently that said, hard words with truth are better than soft words without. So sometimes when we're trying to be friends and family with everyone, we're not addressing issues that need to be handled, and now we're letting it grow and grow and grow and grow until we've got to let you go, or you're not right for this position because we haven't dealt with it. Wearing multiple hats absolutely is tough. Hey, leadership is the toughest role that you will have within the workplace because you have so many multiple hats. But here's the thing. We have to make a conscious choice to meet with our team and to be that leader, whether it's formally or informally. Whether it's something that I'm going to walk around every morning and say good morning to people and talk with them. love that, direct communicator, but trouble with conflict. So by the time it comes up and we're ready to deal with it, maybe you feel this way, that I've talked about it, I've held it in, and all of a sudden I'm going to tell you exactly how I feel, but it's going to come across as very short. Um, and then shorthanded. So how do you deal with employees that do the least amount of work? That is a tough one because a lot of times we keep employees and we don't deal with employees' issues because we're already shorthanded. So what happens if I continue to allow this to grow? Now they're going to be here. If I let them go, we're going to be shorthanded again. What you have to say is, I've got to be consistent. I've got to give that feedback, because a lot of times those that are left, if that person does leave, a lot of times those that are left will appreciate the more positive environment, so that they move forward with it. So these are great. Not having sufficient owner support is frustrating. I get it. There's a great book out called How to Lead Without Being a Leader. Really truly recommend that you read it, because it talks about influence and the influence we have, and many times as leaders, that's really what we're focusing on, is influencing them, even if we don't have that support. So what's some of the greatest successes? And you know what, if you notice, there's some patterns going on. So for those of you who have felt that you've had to deal with this all by yourself, you are not alone. It is in different workplaces, so we can work through it. So some of those successes is mentoring a couple of staff members into and through the CVT program. Awesome. Putting yourself in their position. They're more likely to listen to you. Absolutely. I've been there, done that. Here's what I've learned. Love routine coaching sessions. You have to be consistent, and that goes right directly into engaging your employees. If you're not meeting with them, if you're not talking with them, if you're not being consistent with coaching with them, then you're not connecting, and you can't influence and bring change to those behaviors without being engaged with them, without them feeling like this person understands me and cares about me. Love that. Being true. If I say it and I'm not true with my words, listening to their concerns, willing to do the same thing. We're all window washers here. Absolutely. Walk the talk. Have them trust you with their internal and external struggles so that you can come up with a solution. Listening. So all of these, the listening, the walking the talk, all great. Sorry about that, technical difficulties and all, but I am back. See, and this is how we just roll with everything. That's the sign of how we deal with change. So thank you for sticking with me. We are good. So going back to communication. So here's a perfect example of walking the walk, talking the talk, and connecting with you. I could have tried to backpedal and say, oh, I don't know what happened, but we had a technical issue. So as a leader, I'm telling you, we had a problem, but we are back and we are good and we are owning it. And so now the next time we lose sound, you're more likely to say, oh, it's a technical issue. I'm going to hang in there with them as we work to overcome it. Exactly. It was the internet, something outside of our control, but we owned it. As leaders, as managers, when you connect with your team, when you own your mistakes, when you own the problem, even if it's outside of your control, then you begin to connect with them. And then you have to, when you say, okay, we can't dwell on what the issue was, or we can't control what caused it. We're not going to be victims of it. We're going to overcome these circumstances is when you begin to influence your team. You help them know and grow with what they're doing. But there's a second challenge that we have to deal with as we're talking about this, and that is having those frequent check-ins. So the challenge is as a leader, if we are not communicating and we're not being consistent, we're going to lose that trust. So a true leader gives clear expectations. They have frequent progress checks. I love someone said that constant coaching opportunities. And it doesn't have to be something that is formal. It could be informal, the hallway conversations, but then give them the opportunity to give feedback. You give an action plan review. You offer continuous education for your employees as well as take advantage of it yourself. Look at those articles, read, learn more, and then also ask for employee feedback. What can I do to be a better manager, be a better leader for you? And some of it may be tough to hear, especially if you're using an employee engagement survey where it's a third party, it's completely anonymous, it's something that Omnia offers, and you hear some of that feedback and you want to go, okay, well, why is this? And let me be defensive versus owning it and saying, okay, I've asked for this feedback. What can I do to overcome it? A lot of times, a manager, especially a new manager, will have inconsistent expectations, and that can be looked at as favoritism. And they don't give feedback. They may say, my way is the only way with little to no coaching. They address issues too quickly. When I was first starting out in my management role, I had someone late, and I said, if you're late one more time, you're fired. I didn't ask them why they were late. I just handled it completely wrong. But I had to learn, okay, ask what's the problem? Is it something that we can work on? Maybe it's something that the issue is a lack of education, a lack of knowledge. In that instance, they had a flat tire, and I'm going to tell my age a little bit, but it was before everyone having a cell phone was common, so they had no way of calling me. And they communicate frustrations unprofessionally. Going back to that example was, if you're late one more time, you're fired. I was working in a retail store at 19 years old and was the only person in the store and could not leave the front of the store. So my replacement was coming in and I had to use the restroom. And I was frustrated because she was almost an hour late. So I communicated that unprofessionally by saying, if you come in late one more time, you're fired. Because I was mad. I was frustrated about something that was a symptom, but not the source. And sometimes as managers, we can take those frustrations out on other people around us. The other thing that we do is we set unrealistic goals, or we want to just make change for change's sake because I'm the leader. Woohoo! A true leader doesn't make change just for change. So you've got to ask yourself, are my goals realistic of where I want to take the department or the organization? What's the purpose of this change? Is it the right time to introduce the change? If it's day 5 after you become a manager, it's probably not the right time to introduce the change. And do my expectations cause myself or my team stress? Are you trying to do it too quickly? Because that leads into the challenges. When you try to affect change too quickly, too fast, then you're going to run into some interpersonal complications, those organizational hurdles and physical barriers. So the interpersonal complications is you may be managing people who don't like change. And if you try to introduce change too quickly, their productivity is going to decline. You may receive information that you feel is them kind of being insubordinate. I don't know why we're doing this way. Oh, there Kim goes, throwing her weight around because she's the boss. By stopping, having some conversations with them, you're going to be able to really understand those interpersonal complications. Why do we have these changes? Who embraces it? Who do I have to give as much advanced knowledge to as possible? The organizational hurdles may be something that's beyond your control, but you still have to deal with it. Maybe you've moved up into that position of leadership because there's an opening, and now you're having to learn your job, their job, and everything else all at once. Or the other aspect is of that organizational hurdle is if you are in middle management. So we had someone say that I don't have the ownership support. If you are in that role where you are having information relayed to you and you may not agree with it, but at the end of the day, as that leader, we can't go back to our team and go, we got to do this, but I don't want to. I think it's awful. We have to step up and say, okay, here's the issue. How am I going to convey this to my team and help them grow? And then exactly leading the leaders, and then those physical barriers, which could be something as remote managers. So what are you going to do when you have those remote employees? It's easy to give constant coaching and feedback when you have someone who's in the office right across the hallway from you. But if you have someone in another state, in another time zone that's working for you, how do you manage them? You've got to make sure that as a manager, you're not just managing their responsibilities, but as a leader, you're bringing them in together to say, here's what we are doing. You're a part of this team. So that could be something as simple as when you're looking at and you're conducting a conference call or a video conference, making sure that when the person who's remote is there speaking, that everyone is paying attention, especially if it's a video conference. Hello, we can see each other. So they can see when everyone else is having sidebar conversations versus looking at the information, looking at the person who's sharing that. Maybe you play some icebreaker games on the conference calls where you have people send in pictures of their offices or their computer, their workspace, and say, okay, guess whose workspace this is? Maybe you hold virtual coffee chats where everyone, at 3:30 on a Friday afternoon, we're going to take a 10-minute break and anyone who wants to join us can. And we're not going to necessarily talk about work, but it's some of those water cooler conversations that allow you to overcome those physical barriers where you're bringing everyone back into the team. And then as a leader, so as a manager, you have to ask yourself, stop. Do I have everyone? Because a lot of times as managers, we get so focused on the goal that we convey the information and we're focused on the goal, and all of a sudden we look around and we're like, hey, where'd everybody go? Because we have left our team behind us. So you've got to make sure that as you transition from a manager, which you have to focus on the goal, but you also have to make sure that you're leading and influencing your team. You're giving them the detailed information. You're connecting the dots of why this goal or why this task is important to the overall vision, culture, goal of the company. You've got to allow your team to ask questions, and some of those questions may be hard questions. Some of those questions you may go, I don't really have the answer, but we're going to work on it. And then delegate appropriately. Goes back to building the connection. So as new managers, a lot of times, remember how I said we want to hold on to tasks, especially if our natural tendency is we want things done right and we want it done fast. And we say, you know what, by the time I tell you how to do it, I could have it done myself, so I'm just going to take care of it. What you're telling your team is, I don't trust you. And you're not sharing your knowledge, which is critical. You have to share the information that you have. So make sure that you're delegating, making sure that as you're adding new people to the team, you're giving them the opportunity. A leader recognizes their high potentials? Are you recognizing those people who have that potential to move up into leadership? For those of you who aren't managing people currently, someone believed in you. Someone told you about this webinar for you to call into so you can kind of hear the differences between management and leadership. That gives you that opportunity to say, okay, those high potentials, I may delegate to them to lead a project or to mentor new employees so we can see how they work. You want to set your guidelines. You want to tell them what those non-negotiables are, but you've got to trust your team, but verify. Are they doing the job? Why am I saying trust but verify? Is because it's very easy to correct when someone is going slightly off track, but when they've gone onto a completely different roadway from everybody else, it's tougher to bring them on board. So by having those frequent check-ins, your leaders are knowing, okay, we're all on the same page. We're moving forward to the vision. We're where we need to are. Okay, we've got to have a course correction here because we understand mistakes happen. But as we do that, we can say, okay, what's the ownership? What did you learn from it? Where are we going? We cannot leave our team behind. Stop it if that is you. That is a trait of a manager. You want to be a leader, which means that you are bringing your team with you. And as we talk about those differences between managers and leaders, a lot of times their frequent check-ins is about the progress to the goal versus the people and the understanding. And their accountability is typically punitive versus learning. So you did this wrong, here is your punishment. Whereas a leader inspects what they expect. They create an ownership culture. So they want people to understand what their role is, how it contributes to the overall aspects of the company and the bottom line, and then allow them to create that ownership culture. Bring ideas. So a leader isn't threatened by a team's ideas. They want to hear it. So let me hear what your ideas are. What are the front line saying? What are our clients saying? And then they still hold their team accountable, but they use that accountability as a learning experience. What I mean by that is we're all going to make mistakes. And yes, sometimes there are some serious repercussions to those mistakes, and we may have to take a corrective action from it. But we're not going to beat a person up because they made that mistake. What we want them to do is to learn from it. A lot of times I'll ask questions such as, well, why don't you walk me through that? What was your thought process? When I ask the questions of what was your thought process on that, then all of a sudden I get, well, I did this and did this and did this, and then I'm able to pinpoint exactly what I'm looking for, what the issue was. Maybe it's a lack of knowledge. Maybe it was a lack of caring, which is a completely different accountability conversation. But whatever it is, we've pinpointed it. So we're inspecting what we expect. You may have some people on your team which accountability for them because they want everything to be perfect and they're beating themselves up about it because they made a mistake. Your accountability is to say, yes, you made a mistake, but what can we learn from it and not dwell on it? Because as we learn from it and grow, you're able to help them move past it and proceed. And you want to use your resources. So we've talked a lot about understanding yourself, understanding the next steps, understanding your people. And you may be saying, Kim, how in the world am I going to know that? Well, one of the ways that Omnia offers that is our leadership reports. So we talk about in this what your strengths are, what your challenges are. We give you an action plan. We're actually having a paid webinar that talks exactly about this on the 22nd of February. It's going to be our last series. And if you have 3 or more employees sign up for it, then you can get a discount for it. If you don't have employees, but you want to understand what your leadership style is, what makes us tick, or I've got this, but I don't understand about this employee. How can I manage them? Because there is negativity. Give us a call. It's one of the things that we specialize in. But before you can do that, you have to understand yourself. Remember, self-awareness, awareness of others, and then adapt and apply. So you may know, I know we had someone who made a comment who said, I'm a direct communicator, but I hate conflict. So what can I do with that? A lot of times we can talk through, here are your strengths, here are your challenges, here's why you want to avoid conflict, and here are some tips to do that. Because regardless of what your leadership style is, you are going to have strengths and challenges. Whether it's that person who's so assertive that, I like to say, so I want to hear your thoughts on how we can improve sales. Here's what I think. Well, you're not really listening to that person who just doesn't want to delegate. We can help you with that. And I love this quote by John Maxwell that says, a manager says go. A leader says let's go. So you can be a good manager and not be a good leader because you're focused on the task. Let's go. Let's get this project done. We're going to move forward with it. But to be a great leader, you first have to say, let's go to yourself. How am I going to move forward with it? And then how am I going to help your team? So create a development plan, and we actually have that available for you for download today. Use your resources. Being on our webinar is a great resource, but check out the other webinars. Like I said, if you missed last week, you can check on it. We've got another one on the 15th that you can access. Communicate your needs and create an environment where your employees and your direct reports can communicate their needs. What are you looking for? I need help with conflict resolution. I need help with communication. And then hold yourself accountable as a leader to say, I want to grow every single day in my leadership skills. There's so many different ways that you can do it. And growing may be, I don't like to talk with people, but I'm going to set 3 pennies on my desk. And every time I get up from my desk, I've got to talk to someone different just to make contact with them. And I'm going to set a goal of 3 a day. I talk with one person, the penny goes off my desk, it goes in my drawer. Talk to the second person, talk to the third person. That will allow yourself to have those goals and hold yourself accountable. And the leadership development plan that we were talking about, you can list 3 strengths you have as a leader, 3 challenges that you have, and your challenges can't be I need better pay, better hours, and better technology. Look at yourself and say, what can I do differently as a leader? What do I struggle with? And most of you have those ideas. You answered that question. And then what can you do to improve on those challenges? Resources you need from senior leadership, or a life coach, or a mentor. And then give yourself some goals, 3, 6, 12 months. So if you're a new manager, you may say, I want to sit down and talk with every one of my direct reports and ask them this question. What could I do to better manage you? And listen to what they have to say. Because if you're not setting goals, then you're not going to have anything to hold yourself accountable for. So know what is in your leadership toolbox as well. So as Omnia, we're a behavioral assessment company. We have selection so that you can make sure you're hiring that right person from the very beginning and asking yourself, can I coach these areas of opportunity? Do I want to? But then also use some of our development reports. We offer everything from leadership reports that talk about your style to our development suite talks about sales. How does this person, what's their selling style? How do they work in a customer service role? Collections, professional development. We offer some one-on-one consultations as well as those paid webinars that we talked about. So make sure that you're using all of the tools in your toolbox. If you have any questions about that, you can contact me directly. But I also want to just open us up for questions. We've got a few minutes, so type them in the chat box. One of the questions that I always am asked is, as a leader, can you ever turn around your leadership style? I've had a rocky start. I've lost trust and credibility. How do I go about it? The answer is yes, you can, but it's going to take some time. You really have to commit to it and be consistent because everyone is watching you, waiting for you to make that same mistake again. So as you inspect what you expect of your team, you can do that as well. So just a couple of takeaways. You can download our leadership development plan as well as a copy of this presentation. Make sure that you join us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can view our webinars by clicking on our helpful link, as well as on the 15th. Our next webinar is going to be Set Your Managers Up for Success, Not Disaster. You're going to have a great presenter with Tanya, so listen in for that. And then on the 22nd, we're having a special coaching and training webinar, How to Succeed as a First-Time Manager. You can definitely click on the link in the chat box. It's $39.99 and includes that leadership report that we were talking about and some very specific coaching for that first-time manager. So I'm not seeing any questions or comments. So I just want to say thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for hanging in with the internet issue. And we look forward to talking with you next week. Thank you.